Okay, we're back and we're going to start a new chapter, chapter 25, Psychosocial Development in Late Adulthood. Okay, now if you recall from earlier stages of development, there are different approaches to explaining how we develop. The normative crisis approach is the general perspective that we go through periods of normalcy that are punctuated by crises. Erikson is an example of a normative crisis approach. And so I thought we should zoom in. I thought we should start with adolescence because it's going to be relevant in a second. And then we go through early adulthood, middle age, and the aging years, he called it, or late adulthood. So as we've already discussed in other stages of development, we talked about adolescence and how they're going through the identity versus role confusion stage, trying to figure out who they are, stuff like that. By early adulthood, attention starts to turn towards trying to find an intimate relationship, making a commitment to other people, being able to show love. And by middle age, trying to be generative, leave a mark, show that you were there and that you did meaningful things in your life. And then finally, we're in the late adulthood years where we talk about the crisis being that between integrity and despair. So this is the new stage that we haven't talked about yet. Integrity would, our ability in our old age to say, I have fulfilled my real self, that I have lived in a way that is in accordance with my values, what I believe, the kind of person I think I am. A person who is displaying integrity will be able to look back on their life and maybe acknowledge that things weren't done perfectly, but that they were done to the best that the person could do at the time. They don't look back on their lives with regret and say, oh, if only I could do it again. I mean, we all look back and say, well, I guess I really missed an opportunity, or maybe I shouldn't have said that rude thing that I said. We all do that. But what Erikson was talking about is being able to look back on life and say, overall, I lived a pretty decent life, and I was consistent with what I value, and I was consistent with who I am. If a person can do that, they gain the virtue, according to Erikson, of wisdom, the ability to see the big picture, to take different perspectives, to put situations into context. So wisdom is something that comes from being true to yourself, as far as Erikson is concerned. Now, of course, this is, he thought, a really big crisis in our later years because we're all coming to terms with our mortality during that period of time. This awareness that, our clock is winding down, we're getting closer to the end. And so if we realize that and we say to ourselves, well, you know what, I've lived a pretty decent life. Some good things happen, some bad things happen, some good decisions, some poor decisions, those kinds of things. But that overall, I lived a good life. He said that we're going to be more sanguine, more calm in the face of our own death, our own mortality. Whereas if we are dissatisfied with life and we wish that if only we could have a do-over, then he says that we could end up in despair. Okay, so that's enough on Erikson. Oh, I wanted to say something though about, I started this chart with adolescence on purpose because one of the things that we have to remember about Erikson's theory is that, first off, there's not a lot of data that supports that what he's talking about is true. He was a psychoanalytic theorist like Freud, and so there's a lot of theory and not a lot of data. But of people who have done research on the identity versus role confusion issue and adulthood, have discovered that people face different identity confusion periods at multiple times during their lives. So for example, when we make the transition from parent, as our kids are at home and we have all these things that we have to do, and then our kids grow up and they leave the house, and we realize, okay, I am no longer a person who has kids who I am raising living in my house. That's going to be an identity conflict again, where a person may have to spend a little bit of time thinking, okay, at the minimum, I have a bunch of time available to me now that I could spend doing something else that I used to spend in child rearing or food prep or other things that I used to do. So that's one time that a lot of people go through a little bit of an identity conflict. Another time that people will go through an identity conflict is when they leave work, when they retire. They may go through a period of time where, again, they're struggling with their basic sense of, okay, so now that I could do anything I want to with my free time, what do I want to do? Who do I want to spend my time with? What kinds of activities, causes do I want to, invest my time and energy in? Which ones do I want to let go? So multiple times across adulthood, we probably face identity challenges as we try and sort of put ourselves into our new context and sort of redefine ourselves as things change around us. Speaking of us, self-theories. Self-theories say a lot of things about aging and development, things like that, but what I really wanted to enhance or really spend a little bit of time talking about is something that the self-theorists have noticed, which is the positivity effect. It's our tendency to perceive, prefer, and remember positive things more readily than negative things. So if we look at late adulthood and we take the positivity effect into consideration, we realize that an older person may preferentially remember things from their years leading up, from childhood on, things that were positive. So they'll fondly remember their childhood or their adolescent years, even though at the time they might have been dissatisfied. They might have thought, I don't have enough autonomy, or I don't make my own choices, or I don't have enough money, or things that they were dissatisfied with at the time. They look back now with another term for it is rosy retrospection, where we look back and we remember things more positively than they were. When we see people displaying this kind of selective memory for positive things, it's a type of compensation. We talked about compensation in the previous chapter. The idea that, okay, so maybe my life wasn't perfect and I didn't always make the right choices and I wasn't always satisfied. But if I look back on the positive things more readily than the negative things, it allows me to sort of compensate for the fact that everything wasn't exactly how I wanted it to be. It causes us to say, well, yeah, some unpleasant things happen, but they either are inconsequential, like they aren't enough to pull us down, or even more likely, they might have been beneficial now in retrospect. So for example, you might talk to your grandparents or to somebody who's over the age of 70, and you ask them to remember back when they were newlyweds. For example, tell me about when you guys were newlyweds, tell me about the first year of your marriage. A lot of times they'll say things like, I don't have any money, and we lived in this horrible apartment. It had, cockroaches, and we only had one set of sheets, and, they'll tell you these things. They'll say it with a smile on their face. They'll say it like, but you know what? We lived on love. Those kinds of things. When I used to ask my grandparents who got married in 1938, tell me about when you guys were newlyweds. They tell me these stories that probably at the time were not that fun to live through. Like, for example, my grandfather told me that grandma wasn't really familiar with doing the laundry, and so she put his whites in with something red. And so his undershorts, as he called them, got tinted pink. And he worked at a slaughterhouse, a butchery place. And so I guess when he got to work, he would take off his street clothes down to his underwear, put on this whatever outfit they wore while they were doing their work, and then he'd take that outfit off and put his street clothes on to go home. And so he's really embarrassed to have to wear pink underwear in front of his peers. Apparently in 1938 or 39, people didn't wear pink underwear. So he was embarrassed. So grandma put a bunch of bleach in with the whites, thinking it would take the red out. And so he said he had his newly, bleached out undershorts on, went to work, took off his street clothes, sat down to do whatever while he was just in his underwear, stood up, and the seat of his underwear stayed on the bench. And he told this story with such fondness. Look how she had to learn how to do laundry, and how much she loved me, that she didn't want me to have to wear pink underwear. And she was so embarrassed that she'd made them pink. And I kept telling her, it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. I can wear pink underwear. And she's like, no, I'll fix it. I mean, he retold the story with this sort of, look how much she cared about me spin. And then she was, as he was telling the story, she was narrating it as, well, I didn't want to embarrass you. And I didn't want people to think I couldn't do the laundry. And I mean, the stuff they were talking about was so, now it's a cute story. that ability to recast things is really important for being able to develop a sense of integrity and to look back on your life with great positivity. So it causes our self-perception to lean more towards integrity when we're able to display this kind of positivity effect. If we can look back with positivity, it allows us to bring our ideal self, what we think we should be like, more to light in what our real self was, right? Like maybe I said something that offended somebody and I didn't mean to. In my looking back on it 30 years later, I might say something like, I stuck my foot in my mouth and kind of offended my friend, and then, but you know what? We became closer friends afterwards, right? Like I can put that positive spin. I can say, you know what? My behavior doesn't always reflect my intentions, but it all works out in the end if you repair it with your friend or whatever. Makes us more accepting of ourselves to be able to give ourselves a little bit of grace in retrospect and say, well, yeah, I did some stuff wrong, but I did the best I could, or it turned out to be funny in the long run. That kind of self-acceptance is associated with higher levels of happiness at all stages of life, but also among older people. All right, so that was the big important thing I wanted to tell you about self theories. Now let's take a second to talk about stratification theories. Stratification theories focus on the fact that there are lots of different social strata in any society. All societies have sort of stratifications where there are people who are at the bottom of whatever the stratification is, and then people who are more in the middle, and then people who are more on the top, for whatever reason. I mean, there are a lot of different social strata. We have a stratified society based on income, right? And so we have like the lower income, middle income, higher income strata, that kind of thing. So income's a good example to mention that, of course, being at different strata give you more or fewer choices, right? The higher you are on the economic strata, the more choices you have, because you can sort of buy your way out of certain negative outcomes. Social strata can also affect or limit our functions in society, can really cause us to have more options available, to have things to do or ways to express ourselves, or to limit those things. So I thought I'd focus on a couple different ones just as examples. I thought I'd start with age, since this is a developmental psychology class, and we're talking about elderly people right now. Stratification by age is where there are certain ages where you are less valued, have fewer choices, have fewer options than at other ages. So in this little picture I found off like study.com or something, I thought it was a pretty good depiction of it. You see that the people who are sort of in regular adulthood, they're not adolescents anymore, and they haven't reached retirement yet. They're on the top of the stratification. And down on the bottom are children, because they don't have very many choices. They don't have a lot of opportunity for autonomy. And then older people who have moved out of the workforce. A lot of times they've got more limited choices and more limited functions. So one of the things that we see is that elderly get, first off, moved out of the workforce. When you see a person who's well past retirement age, there are people who will say about that person, it's time for them to move on so a younger person can take their spot, right? Like you don't have the choice of continuing in a career that you love because it's your duty to give it up and let somebody else take it over, right? That's an example of how we stratify by age. We think you get to a certain age and you should move out of the way, get out of the workforce. Maybe you guys should all go live together somewhere. Segregated housing. When I was very newlywed, my husband and I had been married 6 months, and he was in the Coast Guard, and we got stationed in Florida. And we lived in a little town called Bradenton, the station at Coast Guard Station Cortez. If there are any Floridians out there, you might know where I'm talking about. I worked in Bradenton at a little restaurant called Casa Maria. No, it was called Casa Lupita. Casa Maria was in California. Casa Lupita. I was a server there, and then I went to school at a little semi-private, semi-University of South Florida offshoot called New College. It had, at the time that I attended it, 400 students. And it was in Sarasota, Florida. So I had to drive from Bradenton to Sarasota to go to class. And I had to drive down, and it's been a million years since this story. So I think it was called Tamiami Trail, but I'm not sure. I had to drive down this main drag. And just to stereotype, I would get behind, let's say, a very large Cadillac with a very small person driving it, that you could barely see the head over the seat rest, driving about 10 miles an hour under the speed limit on, a 50-mile-an-hour. And my colleagues, my classmates would say things like, shouldn't they all be in a retirement home? Out of our way. We're trying to move. We're trying to get places. And, that kind of sentiment from younger people is the kind of thing that can kind of cause elderly people to just go ahead and withdraw. Okay, fine. Maybe I'll just go live among my own kind where they don't criticize me for going too slow. They're just impressed I can still try, right? So we slowly start moving elderly people into segregated housing, and really just starting to move them away from members of younger generations. Younger generation members will oftentimes be patient with older people, think that they will stereotype them and assume they don't know how to use technology or things like that. And so, a lot of times it's just easier to live segregated, right? I mean, why deal with it? So the elderly tend to get moved out of the way, right? They get marginalized. And so you see that they sort of get put into a position where children are in, where people will make choices for them. It has negative effects for everyone. Younger people actually suffer from not being exposed to older people. Older people have a lot of wisdom, have a lot of experience, have a lot of things to share. And by younger people not coming in contact with very many older people, they miss out on that information, that knowledge, that big picture. Elderly people are deprived and they don't get exposed to children or teenagers. Older people oftentimes will stereotype adolescents pretty harshly based on stuff they've seen on TV, and they don't know. When they come in contact with an adolescent, they oftentimes will be so surprised. Wow, this is such a nice young man or such a nice young woman. I used to take my Girl Scouts to the local retirement home, and they would sing Christmas carols, or they would come around, like we would go over on May Day, and we would make little May baskets with them, or we would go sing and just play games. We thought we were going to go over there and play games with the older people, but it turned out the older people just wanted to watch the kids and pick up their energy. They really just enjoyed having the kids there. And everybody benefits. The kids loved the attention, the older people loved the energy, and the idea that we should segregate based on age is not helpful for anyone. It limits options for people when we segregate like that. How about some theories about what stratification can do or how it manifests itself? I think when we say we should stratify and separate apart based on age, what we're really kind of suggesting is that older people should disengage. That as we age, our friends start dying off, it's our social sphere narrows, and so that makes us say, well, I just don't have a very full, rich life anyway, so why don't you guys do the work? Why don't you guys do all the fun stuff, and I'll just sort of be passive. That's kind of what happens when we do stratification. We give older people the impression that, you're sort of in the way, and it causes them to disengage. Healthier ways of aging would be things like activity therapy. This theory says, most elderly people want to remain active, and they need to remain active in lots of different social spheres. They need to have age cohorts. They need to have exposure to younger people, and even younger people. That really, you need to be active in the community to maintain your vitality and sense of self, that it's really important for health development. And so in this theory, it would be wrong to be stratifying by age, that we should instead have integration by age, and then encouragement of certain kinds of activities that will help encourage interaction between people. Continuity theory is actually kind of a hybrid between these two things, and it says, we can't force a person who is normally not a naturally active person into activity and say, oh, now they're going to have successful retirement. On the other hand, we can't take a person who's normally active and integrated in the community and tell them, you're old, get out of the way. Either one of those things makes sense. What we need to do instead is to say, continue doing what you had been doing. Do the things you enjoy. As long as you feel like you're being true to yourself, you're going to be satisfied as you age. So, guys, I think I've mentioned before, I pull these pictures oftentimes off the internet, so I don't know who any of these people are. I just pulled them off the internet. The ladies on the right-hand picture in the continuity theory, I imagine that they've probably been knitting and spinning together for a few decades. They might even be sisters for all I know. I don't know. But this is probably something that they've been doing for a long time. They enjoy it. This is continuing what they've been doing anyway. And that's what's important, is to sort of be true to yourself. Whether you naturally are the kind of person who likes to get a group together and play cards, that's how my grandparents were. They loved to have people over to play cards. Or if you're naturally the kind of person who's like, you know what, I'd rather just sort of be on the sidelines. I worked really hard. I had maybe a really social job my whole life, and just a little relaxation and disengagement sounds awesome. But for most people, continuity is what really makes sense. Just continue to do what you are doing. All right, so that was stratification by age. Now what about stratification by gender? This actually has implications starting when we're very young and continues on as we age. On average, men have more power in society, right? On average, have higher incomes on average, are on average physically stronger than on average women are. So these have implications. So for example, the stronger thing. One of the things that happens when women get older, if they lose their partner, they are more likely to move in with someone else than they are to live by themselves. They sort of carry with them this idea that they're weaker and that they are just victims waiting to happen. When in fact, statistically, the likelihood of violence against a woman goes down substantially with age. So you see sexual violence would be the Berkeley poll, and then we see the, what would you call that, periwinkle bar is physical violence, and then the color bar is total violence. And so you see that with age, all three of those bars go down, 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 so that over the age of 55, it's very rare for a woman to be targeted and victimized. But women over 55 are carrying with them that societal message that they probably should have picked up when they were 18 to 24 and more likely to be victimized, that they're weak, and that without a man living with them, they probably should move to some kind of communal situation with a roommate or into a retirement home or something like that. So women will internalize these messages, and it has implications for how they live their lives. How about the fact that on average, men are more likely to work outside the home than women are? Well, one of the implications of that is that women are less prepared for retirement than men are. We see in these two charts the percentage of women who don't have any retirement savings versus men who don't have. And then we see, those who have saved less than $10,000 going into retirement. And you see that women are more likely than men to be unprepared. You say, if you lump together, have less than 10,000 versus don't have anything. Let's just go ahead and lump all those together. We're looking at 63% of women who have less than $10,000 saved in retirement, whereas with men, we're looking at 52% in that condition. Part of that is because men are more likely to have worked over their lifetime, and their employer may have put money away for them in a 401k or a pension or something like that. And so without them having to deliberately do something, men are more likely to have money put away for them. Whereas women are more, on average, likely to be reliant on their husband's income. And so they're independently less prepared. Now, even women in the workforce, by the way, all of you who are either haven't entered the workforce yet, and that's why you're in college, or have been in the workforce and are back to college, it's really important for women to remember that they need to be saving for retirement. It's really super important. And you know what? The younger you start, that you can just start putting, if you get a job that gives you an opportunity to put money away, it's better to suffer a little bit while you're young, put money away, because it will compound so quickly over your lifetime. That's the thing a lot of times people forget about, is that you've got 40 years to work, and it compounds and compounds. So it may be painful when you're young, but it'll pay off so much in your older age. Whether you're male or female, that's good advice. How about stratification by race? Okay, so first off, I thought I'd mention something that's important to remember. Things that go into how much you earn, things like how much education you have. The more education a person has, on average, the more they will earn. Who haven't completed their high school degree tend to earn significantly less than people who have a high school diploma. People with college education earn more than people with high school and so on. So education is absolutely going to lead into income. One's health will lead into the level of income that the person has. If you're able to have continuous work without having to take significant breaks, you're going to be able to earn more. If you are able to not rack up medical bills over time, your income will be higher because you don't have medical bills to pay. It's like, I mean, income, of course, is whatever income is, but of course, if income is part of it, then outflow is the other part. You have to be flowing out some of your money towards healthcare costs. That's going to depreciate what you're spending on something else, right? Employment, of course, is related to income, but the type of employment you're able to engage in. The higher your education, the more options that you have, average for higher. The healthier you are, the more options you tend to have for higher earning employment. And the neighborhood that you live in. Different regions of the country have different unemployment rates. Different regions of the country have different kinds of industries available to them. In the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of tech-based sectors where you can make a lot more money than if you're in agriculture or if you're in manufacturing of goods that doesn't take much skill, those kinds of things. So different neighborhoods, if you're in a high tourist area, you may have a lot of low-wage jobs, cleaning motel rooms or something. So your neighborhood might help to determine how much you earn. Okay, so having said all that, thought I would focus in on the income disparity related to race, so that we could see that on average, there are elderly people living below the poverty line by race. So these are, in the blue bars, people who are between the ages of 67 and 74, and in the purple bars, people who are 75 people. And so you'll see that the highest bars are among African Americans, followed by Hispanic Americans. The lowest bars are among Asian Americans and European Americans. And if you're over the age of 67, you're usually in retirement. And so what we're talking about is sort of what the person probably was able to save up and contribute in addition to whatever Social Security they're eligible for. And so to be in poverty when you're over 67 means that you probably did not have much income across your earning years to base your Social Security payments on. And then you probably didn't save much during your working years to have made 401k or some other kind of option that would pay you money during your retirement. So that's what we're looking at here is really the effect of employment patterns across the lifetime by the time we get to old age. Not all older people get the same amount of money from Social Security. Your Social Security payments are based on what you've earned across your lifetime. So these bars are reflective of that. All right, my final thought on stratification by race has to do with something called weathering. What weathering refers to is how much a person has accumulated stresses and medical disabilities across their lifetime. A person who has had a high, what they call allostatic load, is a person who's had an accumulation of many problems across their lifetime. That has made them more vulnerable to serious diseases that may start manifesting themselves in middle adulthood and absolutely by late adulthood. It may limit their ability to reach late adulthood because of the accumulation of stressors and medical problems that make them more vulnerable to serious disease. So I found a really neat study that was following people based on race. They only looked at whites and blacks and then also factored in income. And on the x-axis is the age of the person. And on the y-axis, they didn't label it very well, but what they're measuring there is allostatic load. The higher the number, the more accumulation of problems over the life. And so you see, it's a cumulative factor, right? So everybody starts out at pretty much the same spot prior to the age of 20. All the bars and things are pretty much on top of each other. Everybody's on top of each other with the exceptions of whites who have a poverty income ratio that's greater than 1.5. Everybody else is all together. By age 40, we're starting to see the bars separate apart. And absolutely by the age of 60, we're seeing that for whites, being above the 1.5 poverty income ratio, that means that they are earning 85% more than poverty level. So poverty level is X, and then they've got at least 85% more than that. So they've got X plus 85. So the whites who are at least 85% above the poverty level have the lowest allostatic load. They're still accumulating stuff. I mean, you can't avoid that, but they have the least allostatic number. They have the lowest allostatic number. The higher numbers are among the two groups of blacks, being and income doesn't seem to matter as much. So it shows us that there are effects that are being carried just by being black, that social injustices and unemployment issues and things that are affecting blacks at a rate that is higher and more noticeable than it is for whites. And that's accumulating and causing greater risk of disease and serious illness. So stratification by race has this cumulative effect that maybe when we all start out, we're like 20, maybe 25 years old, it's all looking pretty decent, except if we're doing well financially and are white. Everybody else is looking pretty much the same, but over time, things start to accumulate. And that's when you see that high allostatic load. So those are things to kind of keep in mind about weathering and the effect of stratification on all these different issues that we've been talking about. Okay, that's enough on stratification. We will come back in the next segment. We'll talk about activities in late adulthood.